Welcome back to Sweet Science Boxing and MMA here in Hawthorne, California. I'm Chris, your boxing enthusiast, and with me this week is Andy Aguilar, strength and conditioning coach, and Kristina Castle, who is a fighter trainer. Is that fair? Did I nail that?
I nailed it perfect.
Good. It was like I practiced it.
Yeah.
Right? It was great. No, thanks you guys so much for coming out. I appreciate it, especially so close to the holidays. I know schedules get very difficult, and I appreciate your being here.
No, thank you.
Yeah. And, well, let's talk about you guys to start. I know there's a lot going on in the boxing space, so we'll get to all the fights and everything that happened this weekend. We actually just had a little bit of a powwow before the show, and between the three of us, we saw all the fights.
Yes.
So we'll each have comments and feedback on the different fights that happened. But before we do that, I'd like to talk a little bit about you guys and your experience and what brings you here.
Well, for me, the strength and conditioning coach for Jaime Munguia, Leo Santa Cruz, Jose Zepeda, Panchito de Vaca, and other boxers, also including Chris too right here. My job is just to make sure these guys are coming in, and also guys and girls coming in, highly conditioned and ready to really just fight it out within the ring at their best potential.
Okay. And what's your background?
I've done martial arts martial arts for 18 years, and then I've done kickboxing for about 8 years and boxing off and on for like 6 years. But I've kind of just turned tables and gone completely boxing right now. And thanks to Andy, he's trying to get me stronger and faster and with all his strength and conditioning.
That's interesting.
That was scripted.
That was scripted? You guys practiced that one? That's funny because I mentioned before that we've had a few people on here that have made the transition from kickboxing to boxing. What would you describe as your rationale, or what was the reasoning behind deciding to dedicate full time to boxing or to stand up?
Sciatic nerves. I can't kick anymore.
I think we had this conversation, right?
That's
We
like
had
the
this
number
conversation.
That is, no, very much so. I think that is the number one reason that we've heard as part of this is that people tend to cause damage to their legs that prevents them from kicking. And so they say, or at least even if it's for a temporary or a short period of time, and then so they transition and focus on stand-up, and from there they become boxers. And I think even I was saying, I believe Michaela Mayer actually went through that same experience. So she was a kickboxer who turned fighter. Were there distinct differences that you had to overcome in terms of stylistically, like stance or anything like that? Were there challenges that you experienced early on?
Yeah, definitely. The way you stance, the way you set up punches is completely different, because with kickboxing, sometimes you set up punches to set up kicks, or you throw kicks to set up punches. So having to do everything completely with your hands, I feel like it took a bunch of my options away. So that was one of my main things, was learning how to get in, get out. And then on the other hand, when I started martial arts, it was point sparring. So it was all about just get in, get out, get the point. And now it's like, no, you got to stand there and bang. So that's like a little bit more, like I've had to overcome both of those sides.
Have you ever accidentally kicked someone while sparring? Really? I was just kidding. Have you actually done that?
When I was first transitioning, I was getting so frustrated, and it was a guy. I was like, they were really bugging me, but and I did pull it, so I didn't really kick him that hard. But yeah, I did accidentally throw a knee kick. I was like, okay, sorry, so sorry.
You leg kick a boxer. Yeah. Oh man.
Accidentally.
How did he react to that? I'm just curious.
He kind of laughed it off.
All right.
Oh.
It wasn't hard. I was just kind of like, oh, oops, get away from me.
It's one of those things I wish I had on tape. That's fantastic. And so you work with predominantly boxers.
Yes.
And obviously you've had, you listed a few names, I guess. No, I'm just kidding. No, you work with a lot of really heavy hitters right now.
Yes.
Big players in boxing. Leo Santa Cruz, Jaime Munguia, stuff like that. How long have you worked with those fighters?
Santa Cruz is my longest fighter that I've worked with. I believe it's 4 years. I've worked with him for 4 years already.
Okay.
So I've been through quite a few camps with him. Munguia, this is his second camp. The rest of the guys and Christina is like, this is the first, second camp. Well, for her, this is our first camp together. The rest of the guys like second, third camp already in. But Santa Cruz, I think we're already in like 6th or 7th camp.
Okay. Wow. And Santa Cruz, so you'll be working with Leo again for his upcoming fight? He has a fight on February 16th,
yes.
Right? Miguel Flores?
Miguel Flores.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you also mentioned Zepeda.
Zepeda, yes.
And he's going to challenge for a title here soon.
Yes, the WBC against Jose Ramirez.
Yeah, against Jose Ramirez. So are you guys working on that already, or are these guys in camp, or they'll be starting soon?
We've been in camp. These guys are pretty much like workhorses. They don't take any days off. They're hungry. They want to do it, so they show up and they work hard with me. They definitely really work hard.
Great. So there's some distinct differences between these two fighters. Leo, obviously, down towards featherweight, and Jaime, I would say, a big 154-pound man. So he fights at 154, but he's also very large, I think, for that division.
Yeah, he's about 6'1". He's like a pretty tall individual for the 154-pound division.
Exactly. So from a strength and conditioning perspective, you have to treat them very differently? Do you guys do the same types of workouts, or do you have to tailor it to each of their, I guess, needs?
That's an awesome question. Usually the strength and conditioning component, the programs for the fighters, is first tailored based upon what the head boxing coach wants from them. They always come up to me. It's like, hey, for this fight, I need this fighter to be faster. I need him to have great footwork. I want him to run circles around this guy. Or no, like this fight, for this fighter, I want him to have the greatest conditioning. I just want him to like bang out with this guy for 12 rounds. So it's just really first based upon what the head boxing coach wants. And from there, I asked the fighter, I said, okay, I'll communicate with the fighter. This is what your coach wants from you, but what do you want too? I need to really understand not only what the head coach wants, but I also need to understand what the fighter's expectation for the camp is. And they let me know their expectations, what they want to get out of the camp. And from there, I designed the programming from those two opinions, because it's never what I want.
Sure.
If my opinion, if I had the choice, I'd want all my guys just to have knockout power and just knock everyone out every single fight. But that's not what the head coach wants sometimes. That's not what the fighter wants sometimes. Once again, this is all tactical, this sweet science of boxing. It's not about just brawling and just knocking them out all the time. You have to be a little bit smart sometimes. So I always base the program based upon what they want and what the head coach wants.
Do those things ever come into conflict, though? Like, what if as a fighter I say, I want to knock people out, man. I want to build those hurting bombs, as they say in Rocky. You guys seen Rocky, but what if the coach then says, no, we want to focus on something different?
That's something that I'm going to have to, it's really building a program with what they need and to what they want. So obviously a fighter comes up to me saying, I want more power in my hands, and I got you. Don't worry, I can definitely implement that within the program. But by the end of the day, it's also what the head coach wants. The head coach has the game plan. He has the strategy. The head coach is going to be there within the corner. Be like, okay, we're going to execute plan A, and this is what's going to happen in this round. So knowing that, I know I need to design the program based upon the coach's need, because the coach already has some sort of game plan in play. But I'll make sure to, I guess, appease towards the fighter. If they want more power in the hands, I'll make sure to give them more power in the hands. Is that going to be a priority where I'm going to make them a powerhouse the whole 12 or 8 weeks that I have them? And it's not going to be a priority, because the priority would be the head coach, actually.
And Christina, you're coming from a place where you said you spent 18 years and coming from traditional martial arts, point fighting, for instance. So what disciplines were those?
I've done Hapkido.
Hapkido?
And I still, to this day, that's my job.
Yeah, you train in Hapkido?
Yes.
So we were having a discussion. I tend to think of boxing as something that is very recently, maybe in the past 20 years, sort of evolving in terms of the way that practitioners decide to work with athletes, strength and conditioning being a major component that's sort of separate from your main training. And sometimes boxing has like an old school mentality. The old school coaches, you mentioned, for instance, coaches may say, I don't want you to touch weights. Right? Do you see a shift as someone who's been practicing and coming from a traditional martial arts background where you have very disciplined approaches and things don't really change dynamically over time, or at least that's the perception, I think, of most people, compared to what is combat now, like kickboxing and what we do for strength and conditioning, or what you would do for fitness, for instance, as you work with these guys?
I feel like the Hapkido, out of everything, it made my I'm grounded more. Like, it's all about, like the wide stance, the horse stance, and just throwing the punches from there. I never applied that into like boxing, but now that I'm switched over to boxing, I feel like I can be planted anywhere in that position and I can throw off of that. So that really helped me be able to lower my stance and be able to throw. where most people don't see the application. I know for me, my horse stance really helped me out for there. But then on the other hand, the training for that, since I'm kind of a head instructor and head trainer over there, I've helped with all my kickboxing and my boxing background be able to apply that into Hapkido. So there's different aspects I see out of the kickboxing and the boxing that I was like, oh wait, that will transition into the Hapkido. So I've been able to myself make those different, changes and help the martial art evolve a little bit as well.
Sure.
So I mean, like, we're not going to be sword fighting, like how the Hapkido started out being like a bodyguard, like for the kings and the royals, like they were fighting with swords and doing all that stuff. There's no point at this point. But if you use those different aspects in a real life situation where I can help a kid be able to throw a punch with a little bit more power, or have that self-confidence that if I smash someone in the nose, like, it's gonna hurt, but different stances from the different ways I've learned stuff and being able to apply it into a Hapkido or even a just normal martial arts is really helping my martial art evolve as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you have a clash sometimes with sort of the new way of thinking about strength and conditioning, which is really informed and evolved and building what I'll call modern athletes.
Yes.
Compared to some of the conflicts that you may have with old school coaches who say, don't touch my weights, or don't let my fighter touch weights, I should say. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with that but still get them what they need, knowing that there are techniques available that you could use, but those are sort of removed from your toolbox? So.
Right, yeah. Obviously, weight training is a stimulation and stressor to build strength, but there's other creative ways in order to build strength out of a fighter. And the biggest thing is that in order to generate power, we need to have a foundation of strength. You can't just, I could build power just out of nothing, but we're going to run into a few issues and risks there, which I definitely want to avoid. We don't want our fighter to ever get injured during camp right there. That's why a foundation of strength is necessary, almost, just to make sure that the body of the fighter is tempered to get ready for the phase of power training. But as I said, we're just looking for some sort of stimulator. So if I can't touch weights, then I just have to use creative minds, maybe some isometric work, more time under tension type work with their body weight, going into resistance band training under slower tempos. Once again, just making sure that I am introducing a stressor to temper their body, get them ready for the power and also higher intensity type conditionings, because going straight into like ballistic work and power work and straight high intensity conditionings without any sort of built foundation, it's kind of a recipe for disaster right there.
So let me ask you, in your opinion, just to be perfectly clear, is it disadvantageous for a fighter to use weights? Is it okay for fighters to use weights in certain ways?
Oh, yes, most definitely, because I believe the whole taboo is that weight training is categorized within the whole old school perspective of boxing. Weight training is categorized as bodybuilding. You're going to get too big, you're going to get too slow. And there are ways to actually program weight training into the regimen where they will not get slow and they won't get bulky. I mean, obviously, we want to retain some lean muscle mass with these fighters because remember, they cut weight. And when they cut weight, it's pretty much unavoidable to cut some lean muscle mass, which that's nutritionist's job, is obviously making sure that they are cutting the calories and cutting weight. A majority of their lean muscle mass is retained during the cut process, but they kind of help out with that just to make sure that they do have the lean muscle mass to sustain right there. So it's all a formula right there in which we intelligently program to have them become stronger without having them become heavier.
So what is it in the past, like for instance with Anthony Joshua? There are people who will still say today, Anthony Joshua is too big, right? And he has too much muscle, and that muscle will in some ways impact his recovery. Why is that a true belief? Does having as much muscle as he have impact his ability to recover from, let's say, being winded or something of that nature?
That's a very good question. You would honestly have to ask the coach for Anthony Joshua for that specific answer. But from my perspective, I wouldn't say Anthony Joshua has too much muscle, because we can also factor in the fact that it's a composition of the slow twitch and also fast twitch type fibers, which all fighters do need. Obviously, an explosive athlete like Daytona Wilder, he has probably a majority of fast twitch fibers. But at the same time, those fast twitch fibers, when they're being used, they get gassed out very quickly. Those fibers fatigue, so you see those fighters kind of just gas out like in round 3, 4, 5, or 6. And to battle that is just more of a case where the strength and conditioning coach needs to really regulate heart rate train, like really keep track of their heart rate during the whole camp, because we need to condition mitochondria within the muscle tissue. The mitochondria is basically the cell that actually helps with the whole energetic processes in which the muscle fiber can actually execute the action explosively and also generate more ATP to serve more energy for that muscle fiber to continually perform through the 10th round, 11th round, and also 12th round. So it's not so much of a fact like this guy has too much muscle. It's like maybe that was the plan. Maybe this guy has a majority of fast twitch muscle fiber, and possibly the strength and conditioning coach did the correct protocol in an aerobic standpoint, that he does have enough mitochondria to be able to recover in between rounds or within the round, within those small 5 to 10 second standoffs where no action is happening. All those points counts in which they can recover from that, no matter how big they are. But yeah, I mean, the simplest sense is if they're just too big, bigger muscle requires more oxygen. And yeah, it's like if they can't regulate,
that's what you hear always. You hear the bigger muscle requires more oxygen, and that's why.
And that's why it's like that's the whole aspect where we need to train these bigger fighters within that whole aerobic category. So yeah, they could be already explosive. We can maybe add in a little bit more explosivity, add a little more fast twitch fibers, but it's making sure their aerobic base is efficient to where they can keep firing those power bombs, and at the same time they're able to recover in between.
Gotcha. And Steven, you're in luck. We haven't gotten to any of the fights that happened this weekend. We will do that, and between the three of us, we've seen them all. I think all different ones. No, we saw some of the same ones.
Yes, we saw some of the same ones.
But between the three of us, we've seen them all. But focus so far has really just been on strength and conditioning and the experience of Christina and Andy. So one thing I do want to bring up, and this is because I thought this was important. We actually had this conversation already, but I would like for the listeners to be able to hear it as well. And it's about knuckle conditioning. So it's actually something that comes from a discipline in traditional martial arts. So the idea that you've seen in the past, martial artists do things like dip their hands in rocks or sand and things like that. But it's still something that people practice today in other combat sports, and you could still find videos, for instance.
Hot wax.
Yeah, exactly.
You could hot wax?
Yeah, that's what several people have offered to do that for me, and I'm like, ah.
Exactly, right?
Never heard of that.
Exactly, right? So I want to get your guys' take on this because you as a coach, you as obviously a member of strength and conditioning, my experience has always been that your hands, your fists in boxing, they're sacred, right? They're your money makers. They're what you need, and that you shouldn't do anything that would potentially damage, which is more or less what I think knuckle conditioning is. Anything that would potentially damage your fists. And I've seen videos as recently as last week saying, this is the right way to do knuckle conditioning. Is there a right way to do knuckle conditioning as a boxer? Should I really be throwing my fists into hard objects? Or even in MMA or kickboxing or whatever the case is, because obviously it's not just your knuckles, but as it applies to kickboxing, there are other bones like in your legs, shins, your shins that you condition. Should I be conditioning my bones in that way?
Well, so with the
it's hard, huh?
Right. So in that regards, the conditioning of bones, or more specifically, the conditioning of the knuckles. What these fighters and coaches are following, they're following basically what we call Wolff's Law. In Wolff's Law, when we put a bone under a microscope, it's not solid as if we were to see it within the naked eye. Under a microscope, it's actually honeycombed. So in Wolff's Law, what it states, if you introduce a minor stress to the bone, it creates micro stress fractures within that honeycomb structure. And with those micro stress fractures, the brain actually detects it and starts sending calcium deposits. And because of the fact, like, okay, the structure within my fist, say I'm conditioning my fist, brain's like, the structure within the fist is kind of breaking down a little bit. let me just reinforce it because I'm detecting all this stress, so I'm going to make sure I'm going to build it up a little bit more. So we see this thin honeycomb structure within the bone, and it gets healed, and now it becomes a thicker honeycomb structure. So in essence, all of this conditioning for the knuckles, in theory, yes, it's correct. They're making a harder fist. But once again, there's no such thing as a free card. You make a harder fist, you have this honeycomb structure that's thicker, it becomes extremely rigid. There's no flexibility to it anymore. And not to bring up something really bad, but the Anderson Silva incident where he snapped his shin, that's a great example of that. You saw his shin bone was too rigid, and once he started making contact, and to add to that, even though the body heals those stress fractures, it's like you break like something in half and then you glue it back together. It's whole again, but that little point, that little fracture point where the glue is, if you were to hit that point one more time, it'll break in half again, despite the glue is there. That's what's happening with the fist. Yeah, it's all nice and thick and pretty much sturdy again, but there's still a lot of stress fractures right there, and you connect at that specific stress fracture at a very extremely hard, it will break everything. And that's what happened with the shin right there. There was probably a stress fracture right there in Silva's shin. He just connected at that exact point a bit too hard and just snapped right there. So kind of a catch-22. Yeah, you'll have a much harder fist, but longevity wise, probably not a good idea. You're going to break your fist one day hitting something.
It seemed to give you the shakes a little bit, Kristina. So what is it? Have you had experience with those types of fractures, or is it?
No. It's any boxer. You punch all day long. I have a constant bruise because I don't know why they think they need to punch anything harder. If you punch hard enough on a heavy bag, it's hard enough.
Yeah. Exactly. I agree. I've always been of the camp that you do everything you can do to protect your hands, and I see that there's, so are you saying that you've never dipped your hand in hot rocks because, that's not part of it? You remember the old Kung Fu movies? They always used to show that.
Hitting the sand.
The guys who would and then the more advanced you get, it would go from sand to gravel. Yeah, and then to just
steel pebbles.
Yeah, straight rigid rocks.
I'm good with Tiger Bomb.
Oh, man. Which fights did you watch last night, Kristina?
The last 3.
The last 3?
Well, last 2.5.
So you saw the Charlo fights.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see the Charlo fights?
I saw the Charlo fights, and I saw the Frampton versus Warrington fight, and I saw just highlights of the Whyte Dillian fight.
Yeah, so I saw Dillian Whyte, and I also saw the Frampton and Warrington, but I didn't see the Charlos. I was actually at the... Actually, this is probably a good opportunity to do this. I do want to give a special thank you to All-Star Boxing, Ed Holmes, Jim Fitzgerald, and the Against the Ropes podcast team. They put on a great show last night, and I'm not just saying that because they let me sit ringside and do commentary for part of the fight.
Are you sure?
Check it out on Facebook Live. That's all I'm saying. But no, I really appreciate it, and it's a great show. But yeah, so while the Charlos were on, I was there doing that, and I didn't get an opportunity to do it. And what I've seen this morning is conflict, lots and lots of conflict about both of the decisions, about both of these fighters' positions in the sport of boxing. So starting with Kristina, what was your take on the first fight? So the fight that was a unanimous decision against Charlo.
Like I was saying earlier, it was for a championship belt. And as far as I've known, in any type of fight, when you're going for a belt, the challenger has to come out with something that's over the top, either with a knockout or winning all the rounds or something that's so major that they won. And that's why it was such a shock to me when they said it was an unanimous decision. I was just like, are you kidding me? At the worst, it could have been a draw. But at the worst, I don't ever see it going the other way.
Okay, and what about his ability to compete against other upper echelon types of fighters? Would you say that based on his performance last night, even if you thought he won, and again, I haven't seen it, so I really don't have an opinion one way or another, but based on his performance last night, is he ready to take sort of the next steps and face, let's say, for instance, the Jared Hurds of the world or the Canelo Alvarez type fighter of the world?
He thinks he is.
He's thought he is for a long time.
Yeah. I thought it was a really good fight. And I'll just leave it at that. I don't think he's at their level, but I think he's a very good fighter, and it's going to come with experience. There's nothing saying he can't get there. Canelo's been doing it for a much longer time than him.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes that experience is just too much for people.
So Steven popped on. So Steven said, that's untrue. Same criteria applies to all boxing fights. So this is where we get into the subjectivity of judging and scoring criteria. And I would say that I agree in the sense that there should be no bias inserted in judging. We have a tendency in boxing to insert these biases into judging criteria. And one of those is, and this is, I should say, a strict disagreement that I have with maybe 3 other people who come on this podcast, including Coach and a number of other people, about the right way to judge a title fight. And so you could say that you have to take it from the champion. That's actually an old adage in boxing, right? We say it all the time. You have to take it from the champion, right? There is the opposite side of the coin, which is that the feeling that all fights should be judged the same, that you shouldn't get the benefit of the doubt just because you have the belt. If you lost the round, you lost the round. If you won the round, you won the round. And if it was too close to tell, then it was even, right? So I think that's just part of the subjectivity of it. It depends. And you said something about this fight, which was, it just depends on who's watching it.
Right, yeah. I mean,
right.
by the end of the day, judges are human. We're all human. We have all emotions. We all have opinions. One judge might like the aggressiveness of Charlo. Like, I like that. He really like tagged Harrison a lot in that round. I'm gonna give that round to Charlo. And the other judge was like, no, I like the crisper shots. He just like, despite the fact that Charlo was kind of like pressuring him, like Harrison just countered, flush shot. That's boxing right there. I'm gonna judge that for Harrison. So once again, this is we're all humans.
It's a very subjective sort of component of boxing. And to your point earlier, Christina, you had said you'd pulled up the punch stats while we were sitting here.
Right.
And there are some stats that favor one way and some stats that favor the other. So one is more accurate and one is landing more. Right. And so it comes down to, as you're saying, what do you value? And different people value, I guess, different skills within the fighter. So. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much backlash, on social media and things that I've been reading today, which is there are fighters who say he was robbed, and there are fighters that are not fighters, but fans that say he was robbed, and there's fans that say he was exposed. Right. And so there's kind of both sides of the coin. In fact, I heard the same thing about the second Charlo fight, which was that I'm seeing that there are people who feel as though he should not have won that decision, and then people who feel as though that he should have won the decision. So what was your take on the second Charlo fight? Because he won a unanimous decision, right? And his opponent was 6 days.
Based off of the fight before and that fight, to me, they should have both been draws in that case. Like, there wasn't. I feel like they're both Charlo brothers were the busier fighter. Yeah. And they both landed more shots. But then based off of the first fight and the second fight, if he lost by unanimous decision, how did he win by unanimous decision? Like, I thought that fight was closer than the fight before, but then I don't know.
That's actually a good point. So what you're saying is when you compare the two fights, you either have to be accepting of it's judged this way or the outcome should have been different in some way. So that's a really good point. And I also think that the thing that I find interesting about that one, even though I haven't seen the fight at this point, I will go back and watch it. The thing I find interesting about that fight is that he's facing an opponent who took it on like 6 days notice.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I'm not sure how many rounds he won.
Right? He's like 35 or
coming off an 18-month layoff. I think an 18-month layoff, took the fight on 6 days notice. He's an older man. Looking at that fight and looking at where Charlo is supposed to be at this point in his career, I would say that the fact that it even went down to a close unanimous decision that people can dispute is interesting to me.
And he managed to last 12 rounds.
Yeah, he went the whole way. I
couldn't even fight 12 rounds right now, and I've been training.
Yeah, so I think that That's the thing that's most interesting to me is it would seem to indicate that perhaps he's not ready to step up to the next level if you consider the fact that it was a disputed decision against an individual who is, again, has those disadvantages. Coming off the layoff, has the age disadvantage, has the 6-day notice, type of thing. So I would say that. I do want to mention that Luis jumped on, and he's on the live chat. So he said, what's up? And he also wanted me to throw a shout out to Luis Mejia. Did I say that right?
Yes, that is correct. Best photographer in the world, man.
Best
Check out his shots.
At El Mejia Photography on Instagram. I follow it on Instagram. Great shots, actually. Great shots. So you guys make sure to hit him up on Instagram. So let's see. Charlo missed a lot and got countered a lot. Got nailed with straight left all night. Yeah. I can imagine that's sort of the description that I've read, I guess, in other places, that he was getting countered a lot. Also, though, that, to your point, he's landing more punches, at least according to punch statistics and things like that. I can't actually speak. I didn't see it. I thought he had an 18-month layoff. So someone jumped in and said it was a year layoff. I thought it was longer than that. But even then, for a 35-year-old man coming off a year layoff and taking a fight with Charlo on 6 days notice, I mean, this is a man that Triple G and Canelo were supposedly afraid of.
Right.
Like, I guess Korobov didn't get the memo,
Right. And then they were also saying that, like, oh, well, Charlo doesn't have the experience of getting ready to prepare for him, but he was already getting prepared for a southpaw in the first place. So that's all his sparring he was getting was already for a southpaw fighter.
Right.
So
I think my opinion of these fighters, and I mentioned this a little bit to you guys before, which is that the level of opposition that they've been facing up to this point doesn't show that they've been battle tested to the extent that they are ready for an opponent the caliber of Canelo, for instance. And that's not to say that they're not talented, and that's not really feedback on this decision. It's just saying the level of opposition hasn't shown that they're there quite ready yet. And I think if you learn anything from last night, and you look at their opponents and the outcomes of those fights both being disputed, that it's perhaps Al Heyman is not accurate about their readiness to participate in some of those bigger events, and that they need to take another step.
Maybe.
Yeah.
you also have the thing that they're very marketable, so they're gonna bring that market to them.
Yeah.
So
Lions only.
Exactly.
Lions only. Speaking of someone who didn't get the memo, so the other fight, Josh Warrington and Carl Frampton.
Yes.
You watch that one. Josh Warrington did not get the memo that he was the underdog in that fight. He didn't know. I posted a thing on Instagram and said, hey, somebody forgot to tell Josh that he's not the favorite in this fight. So he came in mentally, think about that. He came in as the world champion off the biggest success of his career, came in as an underdog against Carl Frampton. Mm-hmm. And Carl Frampton even went so far as to say that before his last fight, nobody in the world would have said he could beat me. So that one fight has changed some people's opinions. Mm-hmm. And he came in, he took it to him.
Yeah.
He absolutely took it to him from round one all the way on.
Yeah, that was
I was blown away. Well, I thought it was a great fight, though. What did you think?
It was a great fight. Yeah, honestly, it was. I mean, I give it Carl Frampton. He's a veteran, two divisions, world champion. Obviously fought Leo Santa Cruz, gave great fights right there. But Warrington, really just despite being the underdog again, came in and just showcased it to the world. This is where I stand right now. And that was a great fight though from both fighters.
Yeah, it was extremely entertaining fight. You know what I saw on the undercard of that fight? I don't know if you guys, if you guys follow me on Instagram, you probably saw this post. And if you don't, @BeatTheCount on Instagram, just so you know. Sorry, it's a shameless plug. Shameless plug. I apologize for that. Anyways, I posted, so Tyson Fury, his little brother, I think it's Tommy TNT Fury, made his professional debut on that card, on the undercard. He was the first fight of the night. He is someone who had, I think, 12 amateur bouts, they said, and then went pro.
Wow.
And it was his professional debut. He was fighting a man with 115 fights as a professional, which blew my mind. And his record was...
So he was He was 0-0.
So he's 0-0
and pro
as
fighting,
a pro, and only ever had 12 amateur bouts. So he had
fighting someone that had 112 fights.
and he's 115
Oh, I'm
fights.
sorry. Oh, okay.
115 fights, and the record. When they announced it, I had to go to BoxRec and look it up because I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. Let me pull it up right here. I'll show you guys what I saw. So let's see. Josh Warrington. Here we go. Tommy Fury versus this cat. Check out that record right there. 10 wins, 102 losses, and 3 draws.
He is the ultimate underdog.
Is that like a Guinness World Record right there?
It certainly seems like it.
Like
10 wins, 102 losses, and 3 draws.
Wow.
That man is a warrior. Don't get it wrong. That
No, yeah,
that dude is an
that
absolute
dude
warrior.
props
That
to
dude, I
take
have
on that many fights.
crazy. He just must fight all the time. Like, how do you even do that? He didn't even look that old. I was looking at him and I was like,
Probably because as soon as someone hits him, he flop. Like, I get paid to be a number.
but it can't be that bad because, like, well, at least in the United States, you have mandatory suspensions every time you do that, right? Which means you wouldn't even be able to fight for
a certain period
of time after that.
Crazy.
Look, there you go. Oh, now it's changed to 103 if you guys look up the latest BoxRec because he lost to Tommy T and T Fury.
I like his alias. His alias is
What
Lucky.
was his alias?
Lucky.
I didn't even catch that.
Well,
I love that
I
alias.
didn't even catch that, bro.
he has 4 KOs though. Okay.
There you go. Okay, there.
Steven said you see tons of records like that on the UK. This blew my mind.
Wow.
I mean, I watch a lot of boxing, and this record blew my mind. I once saw a man who was 3-22 and thought that was impressive, but this guy is like out of this world. But you're right. No, look, a lot of these are TKO losses. TKO, unanimous decision points.
Wow.
Holy cow! Oh, he got the victory here.
It's one.
Yeah,
That was a lucky shot on accident. He kind of ran into my punch. I'm sorry. Sorry.
dude, I'm so glad you pointed out that nickname. Hey, next week when we give away Fighter of the Year, you guys know who's got my vote. That's all I'm saying. Dude,
Hardest worker.
Hey, look, that guy's a fighter.
Yeah.
He's not like getting, hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He's just going in there.
And he's
Yeah.
light heavyweight.
Yeah, he's not getting hundreds. He's stepping in there against big men and taking punishment time after time after time, and he keeps coming back for more. So,
Yeah, props to that dude.
yeah, #fighters.
Mm-hmm.
What's up, Boxeo? Checking in. Thanks. All right, so I'm sorry I had to point that one out. But another thing, I think, Steven, you mentioned earlier how Charlo would fare against Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders made his return on that undercard with a victory. So that's actually a kind of a sensitive topic. So Billy Joe Saunders obviously had a piece of the middleweight title and had to surrender that piece of his title because he had a positive test.
Right.
And his was allegedly because he used a nasal spray, and that nasal spray had some ingredient in it. I can already tell that you're
I didn't say nothing.
She didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. But I can already tell. His nasal spray allegedly had something in it. And you hear, that's sort of the theme, right? So when you hear people who have positive tests, Canelo, even Tyson Fury, Canelo with the meat, and Tyson Fury with the boar, which apparently contains will increase levels of an anabolic steroid in your system. But it's always kind of like, hey, I ate something or I used something and I didn't know. Luis Ortiz was blood pressure medication, right? I used the blood pressure medication. I didn't know. How responsible, as someone who's in strength and conditioning, I imagine you have to work with like supplements or have some degree of involvement with nutrition or supplements or something like that. How responsible do you have to be to make sure that accidents don't happen? And I'm not saying that all these things are accidents.
Right.
That's just sort of what the theme is that you hear. But what sort of responsibility do you have to take to make sure like these guys are clean,
That's an interesting question because as a strength and conditioning coach, we all have our hats to wear on the team. There's obviously a nutritionist. There might be a personal doctor within the team. there's a therapist, and my hat is strength and conditioning. And typically we don't want to step on anyone else's toes. If my role is dictated to me by the coach, like, hey, you're the strength and conditioning coach, that is my role. I make sure that their performance level, physical performance level, is at their peak on the day of the fight, and I make sure I reduce that margin of injury as small as possible. I'm going to mitigate that as much as possible. Nutrition, supplements, if they come up to me, I'll always make sure to do my research and give my opinion, but usually that should be the nutritionist, on-team nutritionist responsibility right there too. But by the end of the day, I've had this conversation with a lot of people too. It's always the responsibility of the fighter. It's like they need to be completely aware of what they're consuming and where is that product coming from. If it's coming from Amazon, well, I really hope they understand that it's coming from Amazon, a third party place that you have no idea what's inside that protein powder that they got. They just need to be aware, and that's because that's their career. This is their life. They're professionals, so they need to hold themselves to that standard every single day within their lifestyle. So I feel and first and foremost, it's the fighter first. They need to hold themselves responsible. They need to take every single precaution to keep themselves clean and they don't make any accidents per se.
I think that's, yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think that's great. And it's the same thing I think I've said for each one of these cases, particularly for these fighters. So I'm especially harsh on guys at this level, like Billy Joe, like Canelo, because the truth is a nutritionist at a certain level in the sport is, I think it's fair to say it's a luxury, right? Which is a lot of guys who are fighting or competing on local shows or getting started in their career, depending on where they came from, right? So Olympians aside and people with strong amateur pedigree who were, 17, 20-time national amateur champions aside, a lot of these guys are coming from a place where in all likelihood they do not have a nutritionist or perhaps even a strength and conditioning coach in many cases.
Very true.
You could make an argument that even strength and conditioning comes at a certain level of the sport.
Agreed.
So I think it has to be the responsibility of the fighter for that reason. Not everyone gets the benefit of those things, but at the end of the day, if you're Canelo or you're Tyson Fury or you're Billy Joe Saunders or you're any one of those guys, if you do not have the resources and the know-how to prevent that, then who does? Right? Like if you can't do it, like you make the most money in the sport, right? You're sort of at the pinnacle of it. If you can't do it, then you know what I mean? Who can? How can we expect anyone else to do it if these guys can't?
Exactly.
And I think that's the reason I'm extremely critical of them, is because I feel like they need to be setting the example for everybody else. It's one of the things I actually respected about Floyd Mayweather was the encouraging the Olympic-style drug testing for any one of his opponents. He said, like, I'll do it, you should do it too, right? Like, if you want to fight me, we'll both do it. We're going to both go through the same thing.
Exactly.
And I think that sets a good example for the boxing community, which is to say that, I'm going to be at this level, and I expect everyone else to do it if they want to compete with me.
Right.
So, just my 2 cents. So there were a couple more fights. There's some heavyweight fights. Heavyweight fights. So you said you saw Dillian Whyte.
Yes, part of it.
You saw part of it? You saw the knockout, presumably.
Yes.
Both the Charlo brothers won hands down. I had to chime in with that one because it surprised me. I have seen comments to that effect. I've also seen comments opposite of that, I suppose is the way to say it. But yeah, thanks for stepping in. What was your take on the heavyweights? Good fight? Was it entertaining?
I've seen more entertaining fights than that one.
That's fair.
I mean,
that's fair.
The knockout was a good knockout, but I don't know. It wasn't like a super exciting fight to me. It was kind of a little bit slow.
A good knockout. That's a good point, right? Just because it's a good knockout.
That was a good knockout.
Well, you know what I mean? That's a really good distinction, because a lot of times I think a good knockout will make people go, oh, that was a great, that was great. Did you see that? But a good knockout doesn't necessarily mean that the whole fight was good.
Great, right?
And the knockout came late in the fight, so you really had to sit through the whole thing. I felt like
both of them were kind of swinging. Like, you know how like heavyweights, like they did make it pretty far. So I don't know. I just feel like they were. For heavyweights, they always gas out a lot faster anyways. And then so they just started getting wider and wider. And was a good knockout.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Dillian Whyte, of course, is trying to make his case for an Anthony Joshua fight, which is what the majority of top heavyweights were looking at the top, at that level. It seems like unless Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder decide that they're not going to re-engage each other in a rematch, that is probably the most likely opponent for Anthony Joshua in April. Dillian Whyte, I would kind of put that out there. So do you guys think, based on what you saw, what's the likelihood that Dillian Whyte, who's already lost to Anthony Joshua once, but of course much younger in his career, how would he be able to compete with Anthony Joshua? There's a lot of people who actually consider them the number 1 and 2 heavyweights in the division. So excluding Wilder and Fury, saying no, Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte. Most of them are English people. No, I'm just kidding.
Right?
I'm just messing around. But what do you guys think about that?
The Anthony Joshua.
Let's say this. Would you rather see him fight Dillian Whyte or one of these other two guys?
Personally, as a fan, I'd rather see Joshua fight either Fury or Wilder. But my opinion on Joshua and Whyte, the first fight was really good. But at the same time, it was quite some time ago. Obviously, both of them got their experiences. And at this point, I do see Joshua taking that fight. If he's going to have a rematch with Whyte, he's going to take the second fight again, because Joshua had the opportunity. He has experience too. He grew as a fighter. He grew exponentially. So with Whyte, still a great fighter himself, still powerful and dangerous. Just I feel Joshua would take that second fight. So what interests me more is a Fury or Wilder fight, because those two individuals are just, they're in the top. These are the top tier guys here.
So would you rather see, and I know we're getting into the would you rathers, but I'm just curious because I have to know so would you rather watch, if you're making an investment, so you're going to buy a ticket to one of these two fights, do you buy the ticket to Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte, or do you buy the ticket to Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury 2? Which one do you buy a ticket to? You're like, neither. No, they're too expensive.
Right, exactly. Well, you know how my paycheck is set up.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say that Wilder and Fury too, because that was an exciting fight. Fury really just showcased really great boxing for an athlete his size. To me, that was amazing. That was just completely amazing to me. And Wilder he's just that type of guy. He will catch you. It's not the fact that he'll never catch me. He will eventually catch you with a bomb. And when he catches you, it's going to hurt badly, as we saw in those two knockdowns, especially the last knockdown. But I thought Fury was pretty much done, but no, he just kind of Undertakered up from the canvas. So I'm like, okay, he's good.
That's awesome.
So just from that fight alone, I'd like to see the rematch with Wilder and Fury.
Okay, Boxeo's got Wilder Fury 2. What do you think, Christina? Which one would you rather see?
I think based off of being a good, exciting fight, Wilder Fury would be the more exciting fight. I think they bring more excitement to it. I think Whyte and Joshua, even though they're very solid boxers, they're not the most exciting fighters. I feel like they bring. It's also based off of who you're matched up with. If you have two people that are kind of just very typical standard boxers, and they're gonna, they're not explosive. It can be, but it's just I feel like the other two they make it more entertainment, and I feel like that's what most people would want to watch.
Yeah, it takes two to tango, right?
Exactly.
In the UK, I agree. That fight should be in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
I've already convinced. The reason I agree with that is because I've convinced my wife that we will go to this fight. I was like, maybe we'll take a vacation to
awesome.
London around that time.
That'd be good.
But no, you know what the interesting thing is? Someone commented to me, to your point, like with Deontay Wilder. Someone said that they feel like Deontay Wilder had been exposed in his last two fights against Luis Ortiz and then against Tyson Fury. And I think that's an interesting choice of words. And the reason is because you could make an argument that Charlo was exposed, right? So, and I didn't see the fight. So, again, I don't really have an opinion. I can see you guys are sort of going back and forth on the live chat about who won those fights. But you can make the argument that they were exposed in the sense that, they're fighting who are considered to be quote-unquote opponents for the purpose of creating a card with the two of them, one of them on 6 days' notice, and they were competitive fights that are more competitive than they should have been, based off of what we're meant to believe through marketing, right? So they're more competitive than they should have been. Exposed is a really interesting word to use with Deontay Wilder. I would argue that none of us here or on the live chat or watching at home thought that Deontay Wilder was going to go put on a boxing clinic against Luis Ortiz or against Tyson Fury, right? What we expect is that he'll knock you out, right? That's what we expect. If he catches you, you go down, and that ends it. And so there should really be no surprise by the fact that he's getting outboxed in rounds where they're focusing on craft. And at the end of the day, he knocked out Luis Ortiz. So how exposed was he, right? I mean, you can say, yeah, Luis Ortiz showed that you can outbox Deontay Wilder. For some rounds, yeah. But in the ones where you get caught, you get hurt real bad, and normally the fight's over. And that's like more or less what he's looking for. So I think exposed is kind of an interesting way to say that. It's almost like that's what the game plan is, isn't it?
Exactly.
Isn't that what the game plan is? Like, we're going to go in there.
He hasn't even been boxing for that long, and here he is already, at the top.
Yeah. I think, and the other thing is people, they also, because of his unorthodox approach, or the fact that he's really pursuing knockouts, or that's like appears to be what the game plan is, at least to us, you forget that, like, I mean, the guy literally in a span of like just a few years went from never boxing to being an Olympic bronze medalist.
Right.
You know, like, he went to the Olympics, he medaled in the Olympics. Like, he's not terrible, right? So I think, yeah, I agree. So Ian G jumped on and said, expose the obvious. I agree. Luis Ortiz had him before the ref intervened. Here's what I would say. The scorecards in that fight were nonsense. What I mean by that is responding to this comment on the live chat. Sorry. They revealed the scorecards and said Deontay Wilder was ahead in the fight before Luis Ortiz was knocked out. And I could not disagree with that more. I think most of the people I thought, and Coach thought, and a lot of the people we've had on the show thought that Luis Ortiz was easily winning the rounds in which he was not getting knocked down. He maybe lost 2 rounds in that fight, but ultimately he was stopped. And so I don't really discredit Deontay Wilder, because if you had asked me beforehand what was his game plan, I would have said probably to knock out Luis Ortiz sometime in the middle of the fight.
Right.
So that's where it is with that. But that brings up a good point. You and I were talking, and I had said that Deontay Wilder's actually, he's a big man, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm a small dude. If you saw him next to me, he would look massive, right? He's like 6'9", but he's not very heavy, right? He's only 212.5 pounds, I think, for that fight. And on fight night, on fight night, they said he actually decreased in weight. He went down to 209.
Really? I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, so he was at 209 on fight night against Fury, who is, of course, at, in the neighborhood of 260 or 270. Most boxers don't have to deal with that kind of weight discrepancy. Even though fighters may hydrate up, you're not really you may deal with people who are 20 pounds your senior, but people who are 60, and 70 pounds larger than you, is there a specific challenge or strength and conditioning component? Like, is that just a genetic thing? Where does that kind of power come from? Like the power to deal with people who are 60 pounds heavier. Imagine if Mikey Garcia cracked Usyk, for instance, right? You would imagine it wouldn't have the same effect on Usyk that it has on other people who are Mikey Garcia's size.
Exactly.
But that's what Deontay Wilder is doing. Right? He's hitting men who are 60 and 70 pounds heavier and hurting them real bad, right? Real bad. So, like, is there something about, I don't know, how would you describe it? How do you characterize that?
Well, and to respond to that, it all comes down to, honestly, genetics. It could be the fact that genetic makeup-wise, we have Wilder, who is most likely a majority of fast twitch fibers. He's just extremely explosive from that fact. And also to add to that, possibly Wilder's strength and conditioning coach, the performance coach, is adding to that. But all right, let's add even more power to that, because we can develop power. There is a genetic factor to it. People are born with a little bit more power than others, but you can still train it. So a person that doesn't have power, you can give them power. A person with power, you can give them exponential amount of power. So I'm assuming that's what's happening in the case of Wilder. A talented, great fighter, genetically a powerhouse, and possibly the performance coach that he has is just adding to that power. So when he's facing somebody that's about 60 pounds heavier than him, he has no problem. His fist just kind of cannons right into them.
Gotcha. You know, there's something else that, let me just respond to this comment, E&G. It seems like there's a point where power exceeds punch resistance as you go up in the divisions. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, that's a possibility. You know, I should have mentioned this earlier. I didn't really transition into it, but I do, now that I thought about it, want to bring it back. So Leo's had fought Carl Frampton in two fights. And in good fights, and they went 50-50.
Yes.
Right, so they went one up with each other,
Yes.
Leo and Carl Frampton. Is it something where you had mentioned to me, hopefully I'm not overstepping, but you watched that fight with the understanding that this is an opponent of Leo's and I suppose could be again in the future.
Exactly.
Right? So it seems to me that the mindset is different than that of a boxing fan when you do something like you watch the Carl Frampton fight. What are you looking for in that fight? So when you watch Carl Frampton, is there something where you're looking to see ways to take advantage of his game, or is it really that you were just interested in the fight as a fan?
Both, actually. As a fan, I just wanted to see how Carl would fare against Warrington, and from the strength and conditioning standpoint, I just wanted to see how Frampton's conditioning was, how his output was, punching wise, his speed. It's really hard to determine how fast a fighter is outside of the ring, because you can be like, oh yeah, it's like he looked kind of slow today, but once you're inside the ring with that fighter, like, oh no, he's actually not that slow. He's actually moving quite well right there. But for me, I'm just kind of generally gauging, all right, how did Frampton do on this fight? It's like, how was his conditioning? What was his output? How did he respond to certain punches? It's just like just for me to observe and gauge and just take mental notes from there. But for the most part, I was just watching as a fan too. Okay.
Did you learn anything from it? Any secrets you can expose? What do we need to know about Carl Frampton?
It just seemed like Warrington really overwhelmed Frampton with just from that output. It really looked, Warrington did a great job with the body shots on Frampton. Like, you could tell, like, he was kind of getting hurt with some of those body shots. So
yeah,
and it was just pouring, and Warrington just saw it and just started pouring more body shots, mixed it up with some uppercuts. And just that output, despite the fact that Frampton was responding well too, like any opening he had, he just countered as hard as he could. Just those punch output that Warrington gave him, it just seemed like kind of Frampton didn't have the right answer for. He was just trying to kind of take that round, every single round.
Christina, I want to turn to you for this question, because you're looking to get into the pro game as a boxer, and I know you've competed in other martial arts, right? You said in kickboxing and things like that. So where are you at in that process of turning professional?
I've had a bunch of smokers before in boxing, but I've never had actual, like, a pro fight. So right now I'm looking, I think we decided for around February, just have my first pro fight. And as I said, I've been boxing for about 6 years. So I've had a break for about like 2 years, kind of. So for the last 4 or 5 months, I've been getting back into it. So hopefully by February, I'll be ready to go.
Okay, so you've been in training this whole time, and you're looking to jump in February. Okay. And is there do you know specifically, like, what weight class you're targeting and things like that already, or is that some decision that comes later?
I'm probably going to try for like 126, 128, somewhere in there. That's usually what I fight at. It's usually what I feel comfortable with.
Okay. And in terms of opposition, I imagine that there's some challenge finding opposition in certain weight classes in the women's division. But if you're going to be anywhere, LA is probably the place to do it, because I think in terms of boxing, there's a lot of local shows and things like that. Do you guys are you there where you're sort of studying who opponents might be for you in the future? Because I know you have title ambitions and things like that. You even mentioned you guys are really going to push for it. Right. And you could say that every fighter does, but I understand the investment and the effort based on talking to you two that's going into it, right? So do you keep an eye on sort of the people who are at the top of the division where you expect to be competing?
For me, honestly, I've never done that. I've always just been like, take one step at a time. I feel like if you plan too far in advance, that's where a lot of people, like, they jumped ahead of put the cart in front of the horse kind of thing. And even weight wise, I have had so much flack. We're like, oh, you're so short, like go down to like 115. I'm like, do you see me? Like, I can't get down to 115. I'm sorry. Like, I don't have a problem fighting taller people. I've done that all my life. But my main focus is to feel good at what weight I am. So at this point of my training, I don't exactly know what weight that's going to be. I'm a different weight now than I was back when I was training for kickboxing, and boxing is different as well. So for me, trying to figure out, I want to fight this person, I want to fight that person, that hasn't really, I kind of just want to get the process started and get there. And then once I feel like comfortable at what weight I want to, then I can think about, okay, now I want to go for this, or I want to go for that.
Sure. So so there's a couple people saying that you compete around Katie Taylor's division. I actually think Katie's a little bit bigger, but also, is that supposed to discourage someone? So, like, I mean, I think, like, at the same time, if you look at young up-and-coming prospects, you look at cats like Teofimo Lopez and stuff like that, he shouldn't not participate at 135 just because Lomachenko has a belt at that weight class. And I think that if you were to ask someone like Teofimo, and I'm not sure, I could just ask you, I guess, but I would argue that probably doesn't go into your decision-making process, and you probably don't walk around thinking that a ton of people can beat you anyway if you're going to be a fighter. Or at least I would say you shouldn't walk around with the mentality that you can't win against an opponent of comparable size and things like that. So, yes, there are certainly competitors in that division, as I would argue. There are competitors in any division. That's no reason necessarily to change weight and to go somewhere else. You know what I mean? At the top of the sport, you have to compete against the best. Once you get there, you have to compete against the best. Unless you're on different networks, have different promoters, or no, I'm just kidding. Right. There's a lot of reasons why people don't do it today, actually, and one of them probably is because they don't want to take the L. Right, but
that's true.
But if you're Al Heyman, you're making your fighters a lot of money. I had someone, that was a topic of discussion recently. Someone asked me if I thought Al Heyman was good or bad for boxing, and I said it depends on who you ask.
Right, it really
Fighters
is.
probably love it, right? The fight, like, as a fan, I might go, I don't like that he doesn't make fights between all his welterweights. I'd like to see them all fight each other instead of fighting other people. But those guys probably get paid more than any other welterweights in the division. I'm sure they're happy with their paychecks and with their opposition. So it really just depends who you ask. You know what I mean? But
I think based off of weight and who I would fight, that's a stupid decision, because if you don't feel healthy at a weight to get down to a certain weight to try to not fight someone, then that seems kind of stupid as well.
Yeah, and
if you feel healthy and you feel good, why can't you beat somebody?
Right.
Yeah, and as a fighter, you have to have that attitude, right? I mean, you have to feel like that you can win. There's no reason to avoid it. Leo Santa Cruz, someone just brought up Leo. Leo was actually at the All-Star fights last night. Nice. I told you that. I'm not sure if I said it on the show. But, man, the guy took pictures all night long.
A very humble guy.
Yeah, he's really super humble guy. He was there. He took photos all night long with everybody who came up to him. He was introduced in the ring and stuff like that. I think the Perez brothers, who trained with Leo's dad, right?
Great fighters. Those two are really good.
They were both on the card at All-Star at Commerce Casino here in Los Angeles, California. Both came out with victories. So both look good. Both look good. So do you work with, like, when you work with Leo, for instance, how much is his dad involved? Like, and this is really more a general question about any fighter and their head trainer, because everyone has their head trainer. Their head trainers throw down conditions on you. We already talked about that. So how involved are they in the process? Are they sitting there watching as you go through the motions with these fighters, or does it just depend on who we're talking about?
It depends on who we're talking about. Some head coaches do come to the performance camp, and they just kind of take a seat and just observe. And I always make sure that I want to get their opinion too. Is like, do you want me to change anything? Is everything looking good? And also at the same time, I do take the time out of my day to go to their boxing camp, so I observe them sparring, and I'm also, once again, in communications with the head coach and other coaches that are present there. So it's like, how you liking Santa Cruz? Is he looking good, or do you want to see a little bit more? And they give me their opinion. And once again, at the same time, it's also the fighter. Gotta ask the fighters, how did you feel in sparring today? How many rounds did you spar today? Was there a certain round that you didn't feel too good? Did you feel you didn't have the punching power? Did you feel you were a bit sluggish today? It's just really, it's a question by question type basis. Like, I felt tired today, and is okay, why did you feel tired? It's like, oh, just a little bit stressed out today. Okay, so you're a bit stressed out. So we, as a performance coach, within communications with everybody, we kind of just do a daily diagnosis of the fighter. It's like, how do you feel today? You don't feel too good? Okay, we need to adjust the program to make sure that you're not going to over push yourself today, and because that could potentially hurt the fighter right there. If they're feeling good, it's okay, maybe we can just push one more set today, see how you're feeling, but we're going to gauge it from there. And I adjust the program based upon what the head coach observes and how the fighter feels. Like, felt a little bit uncoordinated with my feet today. Maybe we should add a little more coordination type drills. I'm like, okay, got it. I'll add some coordination type drills. I'll kind of segment it into the program during camp. So there's a lot of communication that's going on with head coach and fighter on a daily basis.
Does it get to the extent with some fighters where you're up there as part of the corner team? Are you like part of the team that's actually there on fight night, for instance?
Yes, I am there on fight night for the most cases. Sometimes I'm in the corner, but once again, I have a hat to wear, and my hat isn't to give advice, especially on a crucial day like that where every little bit of advice in that corner counts. It's a win or lose type situation. So for me, I'm a big fan of boxing, and I don't feel I should be giving advice when the head coach is there. Like, the head coach has the game plan, head coach should be there in the corner, and I'll let him wear that head coach hat. It's like, I'm just there to observe and enjoy the fights.
I think I mentioned this when we had a strength and conditioning coach on before, and I had said that probably the most prominent example of a strength and conditioning coach in boxing up to this point, unfortunately, has been Alex Ariza.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and since then, you see a lot of people, even former fighters, getting into strength and conditioning and getting into nutrition and doing things like that. Like, for instance, Chris Algieri, I think, does some things around nutrition and stuff like that for Danny Jacobs and others. And so you'll see better examples of nutrition, and I think better examples going forward. But there was a period of time where when you thought of strength and conditioning, you thought of Alex Ariza.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I feel like for guys like you, that's bad, because it wasn't a good example. It wasn't a positive example.
Yes.
It's like, you're being associated with people who are, PEDs, people who are disruptive to the camp, people who are, essentially the impression that fight fans are given is that you're trying to take fighters away and that you're trying to do things like that. Does that pressure make it all the way to you? Like, is there an experience where for a period of time, does it impact you as a strength and conditioning coach and people's perception of you that you're aware of? Or is that just like, no, it's just an unrelated thing?
No, I'm very aware of that perception. It's because strength and conditioning, performance type training is almost a taboo right now within the boxing world, because they are kind of correlating with the RISA. So that's why for myself and other great strength and conditioning coaches that are involved in the boxing world, we make sure, as I kind of said, we wear our hat and we are staying in constant communication. We're not stepping on anyone's toes. We're not trying to be the doctor. We're not trying to be the professional nutritionist. We're not trying to be the game planner of the fight. We are the performance. We're within the whole performance category. We're there to make sure that the fighter is at their peak performance, and we want to. Like my goal and the rest of the strength and conditioning community within boxing, we want to just showcase, like, hey, the audience wants to see two great fighters just give it their all in the ring. In order for that to happen, two great fighters need to be very well conditioned and very, very powerful individuals, along with sound strategies, along with the science too. So we want to contribute to that. So because we're fans too, the strength and conditioning coaches are fans.
Sure.
So we want to see great fights among all of the fighters. We don't want to see any
except for your fighters, right? You want those to be one-sided shutouts.
Yeah, just knockouts all the time.
One-sided shutout. You said if it were up to you, it'd just be all knockouts all the time.
Not because it's an easier job. Like, okay, perfect. Night's done. First round. Okay, I'm going to go and celebrate now. But yeah, within the community of strength and conditioning, we're trying to really change that whole image of strength and conditioning within boxing. We're not douchebags. We're not trying to take anyone away. We actually want to contribute, because more than likely strength and conditioning coaches within boxing are in heart, they're boxing fans. They just love the art. And what other contribution can we give other than the fact that I want to contribute to a fighter's performance? I want to contribute to their win. I want to contribute to their legacy. I'm not trying to take away anything from it. I just want to I just want to make sure this fighter's goal on their road to their legacy is nice and smooth and successful.
And as a boxing fan, I also do want to leave everyone with something positive going into the holiday weekend. So we have sort of been reporting on the status of Adonis Stevenson. So you guys were aware Adonis Stevenson was the WBC light heavyweight champion who, after sustaining a knockout loss, went into a coma. And this week, he woke up.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to say that for everybody who's been out there and sending their prayers and wishes and everything to Adonis Stevenson, it does appear that his condition is improving from the critical status that it was in. So congratulations to, well, not congratulations, but I guess
continued well wishes.
Continued well wishes.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm glad you were here to catch that one, 'cause I was going to mess that up. And before we get off today, I also want to give you guys an opportunity, because you guys are involved in many different aspects of boxing and training and all the different things. Where can we find you? Where do you train? Where can we follow you? Is there anything you want to plug? Any events, anything like that going on that we can share with all of the viewers here?
Yeah, of course. You can follow me on Instagram on _Fitsmith. Or if you want to see me personally, I am at UFC Gym on Rosemead. So that's basically where I reside, and that's where all the fighters reside within their strength and conditioning camp. So if you just want to pop in and say hello to any of the fighters, feel free to come in. All of them are great guys and willing to say hi and do autographs, whatever it may be. But if you want to find me too, UFC Gym Rosemead, or follow me on Instagram at _Fitsmith.
Are you saying that we can just go down to the UFC gym on Rosemead and meet Jaime Munguia and Leo Santa Cruz and all that?
Definitely. They're all nice guys.
Zepeda?
Even Zepeda. Is every one of them is nice guys. They're pretty much humble. People always kind of come up to them.
I'm there too.
Yeah, exactly. You want to meet?
That's where
want to
you
meet
trained
Chris too? Yeah. Want to meet
right.
Chris too? She's right there.
That's where we're going, guys. So after this, no, I'm just kidding. I'm going to arrange the get-together, the Beat the Count get-together at UFC gym.
That works.
How about you, Christina?
You can find me on Instagram at $1 Million Beast.
That's
you said,
awesome.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I had to interrupt. You said that, and I was like, that's rad. Sorry.
Well, because everybody used to wear my hair in like the braids, and everybody's like, you look just like $1 Million Baby. And then so I was like, but I'm not a baby, I'm a beast. So it just got stuck. But anyways, he trains me at the UFC gym in Rosemead, and then I also train for boxing at Broadway Gym.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for coming out and being with me today. Talking about it. There's a very action-packed weekend of boxing, and I'm glad that you guys were here, because that way at least one of us saw all the fights. You know,
very true.
I couldn't keep up with all of it. I couldn't keep up with
a lot of fights.
I literally started watching boxing at 10 a.m. and was watching boxing until 11 p.m. and somehow that still didn't involve the Charlos. So, but yeah, of course, Steven, thank you, and thanks to everyone out there who was with us. Mic drop. Peace. I'll be back with you next week, where we'll be here with Anthony Saldana, the lead writer for Supreme Boxing, and we are going to give our picks for Fighter of the Year, Fight of the Year, year-end awards, all that kind of stuff. No trophies, though, because I didn't have that in the budget. But
next year.
Next year. Of course, you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, at Beat the Count, and you're on YouTube already, so you know that we've got it there. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Peace.